This is an India Today exclusive. I'm being joined by India's High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, High Commissioner Gopal Bagle, to discuss the situation on the ground and what is it that India is doing to help Sri Lanka when they are facing the worst crisis of their times. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us here on India Today. Let me begin by introducing you with your experiences when it comes to handling crisis. This is not the first time that you've handled crisis. You've been our diplomat in Pakistan during the toughest times, in Nepal during the Royal Massacre, and so on and so forth, and including handling us media as spokesperson. But is your stint in Sri Lanka one of the most difficult ones that you've had to handle so far?
Well, thank you, Geeta. It is a privilege always to represent India in any capacity abroad as a diplomat. And as you mentioned, I have been lucky, I have been very fortunate to be associated with the Indian Foreign Service and represent my country abroad in some of the most important missions in the neighborhood, which you mentioned. You are right also that this happens to be a very difficult time for the people in Sri Lanka. Apart from the economic difficulties, there is also a political dimension right now. And as the High Commissioner of India, I think what we have been trying and my colleagues here have been trying with the help and cooperation and guidance of our authorities in New Delhi is to extend assistance, to extend India's support to the people of Sri Lanka in their difficult times, and also strongly support democracy, stability, and economic recovery in Sri Lanka.
A very important point that you make when it comes to the assistance. We'll talk about that, but before that, you met with the speaker. Is that a sign? And like you said, a show of solidarity towards democratic procedures. This is not a country that is only facing the worst kind of financial crisis, sir, but also one that is facing a political crisis wherein in India, and the question of India always comes into play. So what's the messaging here from New Delhi when it comes to the political crisis per se within Sri Lanka?
Well, Geeta, you would have seen the statements issued by the Ministry of External Affairs, both in the month of May, immediately after the political changes on the 9th May and around that, and also last week, when there was another round of political changes and protests on the streets of Sri Lanka. So I basically do not have much to add to what has already been said. But in terms of your question about my meeting with the Honorable Speaker of the Sri Lankan Parliament, whom I have known well during my 2 years over here, I went across to convey in person what we had said in New Delhi, because I thought that as a fellow democracy, as a close friend and neighbor of Sri Lanka, as India's representative here, and India being the largest democracy in the world, I think it was in the fitness of things to convey the support that people of India, the government of India had come out with in support of democracy in Sri Lanka, to convey it in person to the Honorable Speaker.
Geostrategically, Sri Lanka is a very important country, more so for India, sir. In that context, how much of a concern is this continued instability in the island nation of Sri Lanka?
Well, Geeta, it is, Sri Lanka, as I said, is a very close and friendly country. It is also India's closest maritime neighbor. And in our neighborhood policy, it has a very central place. So obviously, our policy is not only Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, but in the context of the neighborhood, it is what we say in India, sabka saath, sabka vikas, sabka vishwas, sabka prayas. So we have to all grow together. That's been the policy of the government. And with respect to our neighborhood, when there are difficulties, obviously India comes forward to support all our friendly foreign countries, all our friendly countries in the neighborhood. In the case of Sri Lanka, whether it is natural disasters or whether there are other difficulties, we have always stood with Sri Lanka. And in the current difficulties, economic difficulties also, and even before this, during COVID, India, the Indian people, the government of India, we did our best to be shoulder to shoulder with the people of Sri Lanka.
You spoke about Sabka Prayas, and it just seems like when it comes to Sabka for Sri Lanka, that Sabka has been confined to mainly India. Now, India has come out with a lot of assistance. We'll do a bit of comparison maybe with other countries that stake claim in the interests of freedom of navigation and so on and so forth. But when it comes to this crisis, it has been India that in many ways then one has really come forward. Now, what is the kind of assistance that India has provided so far, and what is it that Sri Lanka has sought that India may or may not be able to provide, such as fuel?
Well, Sri Lanka late last year, sought two types of assistance from us. Some support in terms of credit for its essential supplies, and also a little bit of support for the foreign exchange, for the foreign currency reserves, because those reserves were depleting very fast. So in response to those requests from the government of Sri Lanka, the support that we have extended is for import of essential items from India through lines of credit or credit facilities. These total to $1.5 billion US. Out of this, there was one line of credit for 500 million, which is for fuel, which has been completely utilized. The other facility of $1 billion for exports from India of food, medicine, essential items, etc., is also almost half utilized. There are orders which have been placed, which are being sent across. And there is also another line of credit for fertilizer, which recently has been operationalized. And as you would have seen, fertilizer has come across to Sri Lanka now under that line of credit. For currency support, what we have done is provided a currency swap of 400 million US dollars and also deferred the settlements under the Asian Clearing Union worth roughly around 1.9 or $2 billion, close to that, by the 6th of July this year. So total, it is about $4 billion all put together.
Are there any areas where they're still looking for further cooperation or assistance, but India might not be in the immediate future be able to help?
Well, as you know, this is an ongoing and evolving situation. The reasons of the difficulties currently which the people of Sri Lanka face are well known. Its dimensions are also well known. Sri Lanka is negotiating, as we all know, and a suitable program with the International Monetary Fund. And in the meantime, they do have requirements to continuously meet the essential imports. So we are in touch with the government of Sri Lanka. We have said, and I would reiterate, that we will be supportive of Sri Lanka. We will continue to be supportive. And we would like our support also to build the capacities within Sri Lanka and just going beyond the short-term support of essential items or meeting the requirements of essential items supplies.
You've had a very challenging stint. The challenges have been many for you in Sri Lanka, even before the financial crisis and the blowing over of sorts that we're seeing now in Sri Lanka. You've had to deal with the kind of projects that Sri Lanka has had, the way China tried to take over projects that were initially meant to be a joint project with India, Japan, and Sri Lanka. And yet today, when Sri Lanka is in crisis, as a diplomat, you might be diplomatic about the answer. China is hardly anywhere to be seen. We've seen statements come that they will extend assistance. America, they've had important projects in Sri Lanka, but in terms of really extending support to a country that needs to be pulled out of this crisis, it just seems like they have not been able to look beyond New Delhi for now.
Well, Geeta, as you introduced me in the very beginning very kindly as Indian diplomat who served in the neighborhood, I am very privileged to be India's High Commissioner here in Colombo. Therefore, I can speak about what my country is doing, how we are standing with Sri Lanka. And if you permit, I would confine myself to that.